Hello again. Sorry to be gone for a couple weeks. I've had a lot going on. Visited some historic sites and busy at work and busy on the weekends and just didn't have time to make a video. And I tried to put this one up last weekend, but there's some information I left out. I wanted to redo it. So anyway, there's a upcoming event that I think if you're interested in the Seminole War, you'll want to check it out. Let me tell you about it. We are going to have a Seminole War symposium or presentation on Saturday, May 3rd, starting at 10 a.m. at the Apalachicola Arsenal. This is in Chattahoochee, Florida, at the State Hospital. Here's a picture of the building here. This was the powder magazine in the State Arsenal, built in 1834. And those bricks that you see on the building, the same on the virtual wall behind me, they are made by Benjamin Chairs, one of the biggest plantation owners, richest man in the territory at the time. He had the contract to sell food rations to the Seminoles, and he grossly underestimated what he had to supply, and it turned into a disaster. But that could be a subject for another video. I want to get on with my presentation. And so that will be at 10 a.m. May 3rd. And the speakers will be Dr. Joe Knetsch, who has written several books on the Seminole War and several on many different subjects in Florida history. Patsy West, who is also a prolific writer on the Seminole and Miccosukee people. She's working on I guess, a history of Sam Jones. She wrote an article for the Florida Historical Quarterly in 2016 that has a lot about kind of the Sam Jones definitive history at the time, and it filled nearly the whole issue of the magazine or the journal. Should be an interesting speaker. And also got Dale Cox to give a tour of Chattahoochee Landing, which is just a couple miles away, almost within walking distance of the building. It's where the Scott Massacre happened in November 30th, 1817, that pretty much caused Andrew Jackson to come down into Florida in the First Seminole War among a British fort that's at the same location where the British made a treaty with the Seminoles. So it's going to be a lot of fun. If you can make it, please do. You can just email me. I'll put my address in the comments if you want interesting comment. We'll get us a head count if we need to know how many people are coming because there's limited space in the building, although it does have a good meeting room. So anyway, I want to talk about a woman named Nancy, and this happened in 1826. She was an enslaved woman, and herself and her children ran off and lived among the Seminoles. She was a slave to a man named John McIntosh, who was the biggest slave owner in Georgia. And he came over into Spanish Florida and I guess was also a Spanish subject as well. You can actually see some of his plantation ruins in Darien, Georgia. And I haven't been there, but some of my friends have and took a lot of pictures. Looks like a very interesting place to visit. So he's going to go to American court to try to get back his former slave, Nancy. So let's see what the papers say. So this was the cover letter. This is what I'm dealing with when I'm going on the microfilm, and it's now on um, Ancestry, the Indian Affairs files. If you go into the Indian Affairs files, the Florida agency, I think it's like roll 286 to 289 or 290. Um, Very interesting. About half of it's dealing with slavery and slave owners trying to apprehend their slaves. And it's also a wealth of genealogy information, too. And so this is a letter to Superintendent of Indian Affairs, Colonel Thomas McKinney, from Governor Duval. William Duval's the governor at this state. Tallahassee, Florida, January 26, 1826. Duval says, Sir, I have the honor to transmit to your department some papers in relations to a claim by General John McIntosh for slaves and an opinion on the same that he obtained from the agent. Since delivery of this opinion, you'll see the certificate of the keeper of the public archives residing in St. Augustine, which goes to show that the Negroes claimed by General McIntosh were forfeited. In case General McIntosh shall attempt to claim of the government indemnity for the slaves, I deem it my duty to furnish this evidence. So, a little background. Apparently, in St. Augustine, he did something wrong that the Spanish ended up seizing his slaves. Maybe he didn't pay his tax or something or duty, and they seized the slaves and sold them on public auction. And the next letter I have is from a William Reynolds, who is the keeper of the public archives in St. Augustine. It says, I, William Reynolds, keeper of the public archives, residing at St. Augustine, do hereby certify that there was sold at public sale in the city by order of the public authorities on the 15th day of October, 1798, a certain Negro woman called Nancy and her male child as the property of John McIntosh, and that Bernardo Segu became the purchaser, and that the said Negro woman Nancy and her son Andres were sold by said Bernardo Segu to John Forrester on the 7th day of May, 1799, all of which appears of record in my office. Witness my hand and seal of this office, city of St. Augustine, on the 20th day of August, 1825. So this is 26 years later. As I said, McIntosh was the biggest landowner in southeast Georgia. Bernard Segu was a descendant from Minorcan ancestry, and he was also a notorious slave trader. Caused a lot of trouble between him and the Seminoles. And then he, I guess, purchased that slave from Mr. McIntosh and sold it to John Forrester, who was a notorious slave trader and plantation owner. John Forrester had another slave, as doesn't say in this letter, a 15-year-old young man who escaped and became a kind of like a co cohort to Kawakachi or Wildcat. And so years later, about 1840, Mr. Forrester was trying to either get compensation for uh, the slave that was sent to Oklahoma, or even recapture the slave by, say, preferred compensation, because now that the slave had been freed for so many years, his head would be filled with subversive ideas like freedom and being against slavery. It would cause his other slaves trouble. So he didn't really want him back. That's a little side trail. Back to our letters here. This next letter is from the Florida Indian Agency, Indian Agent Gad Humphreys, 2nd of July, 1825, says, I've carefully examined and weighed the testimony addressed by General John McIntosh of Georgia in support of his claim to the following Negro slaves now residing within the limits of the nation. So they're residing in the boundary of the Indian nation, namely Andres, Ned, Jesse, Abraham, Pussy, Peggy, and their six children, be the number of latter, more or less. No mention of Nancy. Maybe she had passed away at this point, but I guess these are six children or former slaves of McIntosh and their six children. Mr. Humphreys continues, after a full investigation of the case, I do give it my opinion that the testimony offered by General McIntosh is such as clearly to prove that he established his title to the above named Negroes. Under the slave laws, the children of a slave were also considered property, even though they're outside the territory in the Indian nation and probably born there. In consequence, however, of the excitement which exists among the Indians occasioned by supposed murder of three of their numbers and of the circumstance of a fourth having been severely wounded near the St. Johns River by an attack of a party of white inhabitants, it is deemed inadvisable, with the free consent of Major John N. McIntosh, the legal attorney of General John McIntosh, not to make a demand of the surrender of said Negroes at this time, as it might tend to do further excitement of the Indians and aid in producing terror and distress to the defenseless frontier settlements of the territory. So soon, however, as the state of the nation will admit it, the proper steps will be taken to endeavor the effect of their apprehension and delivery. Of course, the Indian agent was also charged with tracking down and capturing fugitive slaves, which Gad Humphrey did not do a very good job of that uh, because he understood that it would just excite the Seminoles against removal. So Mr. McIntosh, General McIntosh's son, also John McIntosh, is his attorney. But the incident they refer to that has excited the Indians of four, maybe three of them being murdered and a fourth wounded. Actually, it ended up that all of them were alive. It was an incident known as the Cabbage Hammock Affair, where they wandered on the property of Mr. Solano, I believe, and one of them was shot and wounded, and the other got away. But the Indians were mad and think that they were all killed at this point and threatening to go at war with the white people. So, 10 years before the Second Seminole War, the Seminoles almost rose up and started the war right then. But they were placated and things were calmed down. And in fact, with the help of Captain Francis Dade, who, who went and talked to him in the circumstance, and the Indians were given gifts of horses and rifles or a musket that they borrowed from the army that they gave to the Seminoles so that they would calm down, and they accepted that uh, as a sign of peace, and things calmed down for a few more years at least. But Mr. McIntosh is not able to capture a slave. So the next letter, I do have a scan of that. Very interesting. This is a letter from Gad Humphreys, Indian agent, agent of the Florida Indians, to His Excellency Governor William P. Duval, Tallahassee, 25th of January, 1826. Gad Humphreys says, Sir, I have been honored to enclose you documents in relation to a claim urged by General McIntosh of Georgia to certain Negroes living in the Indian boundaries. Paper marked A is a copy of the written opinion given by me in relation to General McIntosh's claim on the personal application of his legal attorney. It was predicated upon the affidavit of General McIntosh himself, setting forth that the Negroes claimed had absconded and had never been sold by him, and that they were his lawful property, which affidavit was supported by one from Edward M. Wanton, Esquire, stating he knew the Negroes in question to be the property of General McIntosh, that he recollected a time when the woman named Nancy with her son Andres fled to the nation. So apparently he's saying that no, McIntosh did not sell them to Bernardo Segu, that he had, that the woman and her son had fled, and they were known by Mr. Ed Wanton, who was also the founder of the settlement at Micanopy, said that he had known them at the time. So apparently they were captured and sold and escaped again. But it says, subsequently to my giving the opinion herein, before reference to, is intimated to me that a woman whose offspring General McIntosh claimed had been confiscated during the existence of the Spanish authorities in Florida for an alleged offense of the general who was then a subject of Spain against the government. So it doesn't say what reason that the Spanish government uh, had confiscated his slave. In consequence of this intimidation, I applied to the keeper of archives at St. Augustine for information on the subject and received his certificate, which is sent here in marked B and goes to prove the act of confiscation, which, of course, I read earlier. Not knowing what use may be of my opinion thus officially given, I deem it a duty to place the facts of this case before you. I am your respectful, obedient servant, Gab Humphreys, Agent Florida Indians. So that's typical of the time. Um, that's typical of the time and what's in the Indian Affairs papers of slave owners attempting to apprehend their runaway slaves that have run to the Seminole Nation. There's another case on one microfilm roll. The whole half of the roll is over just one court case trying to seize a woman named Rose. So, it's a gold mine for information if you want to research into the subject of slavery, letters from Indian Affairs. They're on microfilm in the state library, uh, or letters to the Department of Indian Affairs. In the state library, they're also on Ancestry. If you go into the card catalog on Ancestry and do a search Indian Affairs, you'll find them that way. And then pick the roles. There's Apalachicola Agency, there's the Florida Agency, and there's the Seminole Agency of the roles that will be describing the letters from the Indian Agency in Florida and later out to Indian Territory, what became Oklahoma. So anyway, I'll and the notes, email me if you're interested in coming to the seminar, and I'll send you a flyer too. And the next time I'll see you again.